It was the kind of night that England rarely sees anymore. A night heavy with stillness, where the countryside seems to hold its breath beneath a pale moon. The air was cool, silent, and expectant. In the early hours of August 8, 1963, the landscape surrounding the small village of Ledburn in Buckinghamshire lay wrapped in an uneasy calm. The faint hum of distant insects, the whisper of trees brushing against the wind, everything carried a kind of foreboding rhythm. No one could have known that before dawn broke, one of the most daring robberies in British history would unfold along that quiet stretch of railway. The Great Train Robbery, a crime that would shake the nation and redefine what it meant to be audacious. I've gone through the police reports, the photographs, the testimonies, each detail sharper than the last. And still, I wonder how they pulled it off that night. The timing, the precision, the sheer nerve. It wasn't just a robbery. It was an act of orchestration. The kind of crime that turns into legend, not because of blood spilled, but because of how perfectly it played out, at least for a while. The target was a Royal Mail train, traveling from Glasgow to London Euston, a routine journey carrying money collected from banks and post offices all across Scotland. On board in sealed sacks was more than £2.6 million, the equivalent of over £50 million today. And somewhere in the shadows, a group of men had decided that this particular night, this particular train, would become theirs. It began months earlier, in whispers and quiet rooms. A man named Bruce Reynolds, charming, clever, with the restless ambition of someone who believed he was meant for more than ordinary life, had begun assembling a crew, men who weren't strangers to risk. Among them were veterans of past heists, safecrackers, drivers, and strongmen. Each had his role, each was a piece of a machine, but none of them, not even Reynolds himself, could have predicted the infamy that would follow. They studied everything: the train's schedule, its stops, the pattern of guards, even the terrain where it slowed down. And then the most crucial element, they discovered that the train would stop automatically if the railway signal ahead turned red. That small, simple detail became the foundation of their entire plan. They would stop the train in the middle of nowhere and take everything it carried. As I imagined that night, I can see the scene unfolding like an old film reel, black and white, with only the flicker of lantern light cutting through the darkness. The gang waited near the Bridego Bridge, a lonely stretch of railway line that crossed a quiet field. They had disabled the track's communication lines, cutting off the signal from the nearest control station. Around 3 a.m., one of them climbed the signal post and covered the green light with a glove, then switched the red light on manually. A simple trick, but devastatingly effective. Moments later, the rhythmic chug of the train could be heard in the distance, steady, powerful, oblivious. The Royal Mail train was running on time. In the cab, the driver, Jack Mills, guided the engine through the mist, unaware that just ahead, the light had turned red. He pulled the brakes. The massive machine hissed, groaned, and came to a halt. The countryside fell silent again, except for the soft creak of metal cooling in the night air. Then the shadows came to life. The men moved with purpose, wearing balaclavas, carrying tools, their flashlights cutting through the dark. It wasn't chaos, it was control. They detached the engine and the first two carriages, isolating them from the rest of the train. Mills, confused and cautious, leaned out from his window, only to be forced down moments later. The robbers had taken control of the train. One of the gang, known as the Second Man, an inside hand with knowledge of how to operate the locomotive, climbed into the cab to move it forward toward the bridge. But something went wrong. The man they had trusted to drive the engine wasn't as skilled as he claimed. The engine wouldn't move properly, stalling on the line. For a brief, terrifying moment, their plan began to crumble. Reynolds made a decision. Quick, ruthless. They forced Jack Mills to move the train forward himself, under duress. The sound of the engine started up again, louder this time, echoing into the fields. When the train finally stopped beneath the bridge, the robbers sprang into action. They worked in silence, a choreography of greed and precision. In the second carriage, behind a heavy locked door, lay the treasure. 28 sacks filled with cash, bonds and certificates. They used crowbars, cutting torches, anything that could break through. When the doors finally gave way, the sight must have taken their breath away. Stacks upon stacks of money, wrapped neatly in paper and string, sitting there as if waiting to be claimed. They passed the sacks out one by one, forming a chain. The operation was so smooth it could have been rehearsed for weeks. Maybe it had been. Each man knew his role, and within less than half an hour, over £2.5 million had been transferred into waiting vehicles. No shots were fired, no lives were taken, just the silent theft of a fortune, under the cover of night. By 3:30 a.m., the job was done. The robbers disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the immobilized train and its bewildered crew. It wasn't until much later that authorities realized what had happened, that the largest cash theft in British history had just taken place in their own backyard. The gang drove to a remote farmhouse called Leatherslade Farm, their safe house, pre-arranged weeks in advance. There they hid the money, dividing the sacks, drinking, laughing, and celebrating the unthinkable. They were euphoric, invincible. For a moment they believed they had beaten the system. But as I've learned studying crime after crime, arrogance is the beginning of the end. The first cracks appeared almost immediately. A simple mistake. Fingerprints left on a Monopoly board they used to pass the time at the farm. Others left traces on glass bottles, food wrappers, doors. It was when the police found the farmhouse days later, it became a gold mine of evidence. Slowly the net began to tighten. The British police force, humiliated and under pressure, launched one of the largest investigations in its history. Helicopters, roadblocks, interviews by the thousands, no expense spared. For months the story dominated every front page, every pub conversation. The great train robbers became both a warning and a legend. One by one the men were caught, in hotels, in hideouts, even in foreign countries. Trials followed, and the sentences were severe. Bruce Reynolds escaped for a time, living abroad under false names, but even he was eventually captured. Justice, as it always does, caught up. And yet, not all the money was ever found. Over £2 million vanished into the ether, unaccounted for. Some said it was buried, others whispered it was laundered through back channels in Europe. Some even claimed part of it funded future crime. Whatever the truth, that missing money became part of the myth, the phantom gold of the great train robbery. But for all its planning and precision, the robbery was never truly perfect. Jack Mills, the train driver, was struck during the attack and never fully recovered. The moral cost of the crime, the trauma, the public outrage, left its scars. Some of the robbers lived out their days quietly after release. Others weren't so lucky, meeting grim ends through betrayal or desperation. Still, as I piece together the events of that night, I can't help but feel a strange awe. The scale, the discipline, the audacity to bring a Royal Mail train to a halt in the middle of the English countryside and walk away with the nation's fortune. It feels almost unreal, like a story too grand for reality. And yet it happened. When I close my eyes, I can still hear it. The hiss of the train brakes, the low murmur of men working in the dark, the rustle of banknotes sliding into sacks. Then the silence afterward, that eerie haunting silence of a perfect crime, fading into the mist. The great train robbery wasn't just a theft of money, it was a theft of innocence. A moment when England realized how fragile its order really was. It proved that even in a world of rules, locks and schedules, one night of brilliance and greed could upend everything. I still wonder how they felt when the train finally stopped, when they saw that red light flickering in the darkness, knowing that history itself was about to pause with. And perhaps that's the real legacy of the great train robbery. Not the gold, not the money, not even the men who pulled it off, but that haunting inevitable truth, that even the most perfect plan is just one mistake away from unraveling, and that sometimes, the greatest crimes are not born from evil, but from the intoxicating belief that we can outsmart fate itself. Because that night under the quiet sky of Buckinghamshire, they didn't just rob a train. They robbed time, they robbed destiny. And even now, more than half a century later, we're still chasing that red light in the dark.